Every successful person got there by going through tough times. Success is a hard-ass teacher who likes to knock you around along that journey. You know, it takes real guts to not give up and keep going. We'll hear stories about failures and how these leaders flip the script to create success. I'm John Schultz. Join me and let's discover how success is never really overnight. So welcome to the John Schultz podcast. We have a great guest, Jeremy Utley. Look at him. He looks so good. Look, he's got his books behind him.
I'm ready.
The Ideaflow poster.
I'm ready for anything.
Talk about. So we're really excited. He's the co-author of Ideaflow, which is the only business metric that matters. And we're going to talk about that. And I love that concept. He's a Stanford adjunct professor. Popular classes are leading disruptive innovation, D-leadership, right? D.school, you call it? D.school.
That's right. The design school. That's right.
Design school, which focuses on creating real-world impact with the tools in design and innovation, which today, at the pace it's moving, we need that. Keynote speaker on innovation. His podcast is Paint and Pipette, which shines a spotlight on underappreciated creators and entrepreneurs. Aren't we all underappreciated? Can't that be for everyone? I think, Jeremy.
It can. We underappreciate ourselves. That's for sure.
Well, that's probably the worst thing, right? And you're a self-described recovering investment analyst and management consultant. I like that.
Yeah, recovering MBA. That's right.
There you go. You spent time working abroad, including a startup in India, and you have an MBA at Stanford Business, a BBS in Finance at the University of Texas at Austin. Wow. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, John.
All right. So my first question, because I know you'll be able to answer this in a positive, fun way, is can work be fun? Can work actually be fun?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, from my upbringing, at least, work was work, which it was specifically not fun, right? That's why we call it work, right? And that was, it created a very toxic relationship for me with my profession because I didn't expect to enjoy it. And I actually I was resigned to dislike work for a long time. And the fact that, for example, in finance, every single class, I graduated top of my class. I'm not bragging, but there's a point here. Number one out of whatever, 700 and something in finance. There was every single class I took in the progression. I thought, no, I hate this class more than any class I've ever taken. Right.
Wow.
Which is to say you can be good at something and dislike it. Right. And when ability displaces interest or is emphasized beyond interest, it's like the Ricky Williams syndrome, right? You got this guy who's an amazing football player. The only problem is he doesn't like football, right? And I think for me, the fact that I didn't like it never had any bearing on the career path. And it was only by discovering something that I felt was similarly rigorous, which is what I valued as rigor, right? It was similarly rigorous, yet a lot more fun. It's like I could trade into the more fun thing as long as it was as rigorous as this other thing, right? That's what gave me permission to do something I enjoyed, was it was still hard.
Wow, that's a psychology. It's so interesting. A lot of people that I talk to, they're not number one at what they're doing, and they don't know how to get out of it, and they sort of stay in it, right? And then all of a sudden, later, like years later, they figure out what that sort of fun thing could be that also goes along with the rigor. That's very interesting to be so good but hate it. That's a new one for me. I never lasted that long. I also have ADD, but that's my problem. But that's something. That's definitely something. So. All right. So you thought work was this crazy thing. When you were younger, what did you like? Like what passions did you have? What were you interested in? What were you driving your parents to let you do?
I love playing soccer. So it's World Cup season right now. So I'm in heaven. I love playing soccer. I loved acting. Theater was always really fun for me. And you're gonna think I'm a nerd here, but you've created a safe enough environment that I can be nerdy. I loved poetry analysis.
Wow.
I loved even listening to music lyrics. Bob Dylan's, one of my heroes, and he's a poet, right? And poetry analysis. I think my suspicion is we love what our teachers love. And, because there's some teachers who are just phoning it in. They don't love it. And I think it's that passion is contagious and apathy is contagious, right? And I can't help but wonder whether the things we love, if we trace the kind of the family tree back, it's because someone who taught it to us loved it too. And for whatever reason, my literary analysis professor, Mrs. Cook in Louisville High School, home of the Fighting Farmers, 5A state champs in football, multiple times in the 90s, she loved poetry analysis. And I graduated from Louisville High School loving poetry of all things.
Wow. So listen, that's why it probably was a little easier for you to write a book, but that's just, it's amazing what we gravitate to. But you're right. You have to have a mentor or someone that it's almost like you're saying, like their energy creates you to be infectious with what they're doing. And then you try it. And yet some things you might like, some things you might not like. Right.
Right.
So,
that's right.
So you would describe yourself as a kid, then you're saying a nerd. Is that what you
totally. Oh, I loved reading. If I could just burrow away in a stack of books, I'd be a happy camper for a long time. It's part of actually, I feel, I've been blogging every day now for a while. More difficult in kind of book launch season. I would say I've been blogging every week now for the last couple of months, but ordinarily it's every day. And that's actually a phenomenally helpful, almost counterbalance to my voracious consumption of information. Because if I was left to my own devices, I just read and read and read and read. And the fact that I have set for myself a quota of every weekday, I want to share some nugget that I've learned. It's a helpful escape valve, because otherwise I'd just keep consuming and I would probably become intellectually obese. And there's something about that act of sharing and synthesis that's actually, it's like exercising. If you think about reading as consuming, writing is almost like exercising to me.
Well, listen, I think anything you get good at, you practice, but you still want, you got to stay there when you don't like it as much, right? You got to keep moving through it.
Yeah.
Which is, all right. So, okay. You loved reading. And, if you look at some of the most successful people that we read about, Sam Zell and others, most of the day they spend reading, right? Because they let the information come, and that's where they get their best ideas. So I believe that's a big thing, people should at least try to do.
Yeah.
But here you are, you found some passion, but you still went into management consulting. Right.
I know.
The fact that you went into something that every class you hated more than the other, why did you make that decision?
I think because I hadn't been enlightened that there was a different way. For me, the only question is, what's the best job you can get? That's it. It's and as defined by prestige or some other thing, right? So I went to University of Texas.
Yeah.
Most finance, however you want to say it, majors go into investment banking. Okay. So the best of investment banking jobs would be, Goldman or JP Morgan, something like that. Right.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing that everybody acknowledged was better than investment banking was management consulting, not because it's better objectively, but because there's fewer positions, right? At least when I was in school, there were a bunch of investment banks. And while there's some kind of hierarchy, that's all within the investment banking band of prestige. Well, management consulting, at least at the big 3 or 4, you got BCG, Bain, and McKinsey, that was perceived as more prestigious. And because McKinsey didn't recruit at the University of Texas, the Longhorns aren't good enough, at least at the time, BCG was, at least to my mind, as far as kind of the water cooler talk of prestige, it was the single best job I could get out of school. So I went after it and I got it. Not because I was compelled by it or because I was going to be good at it or because I was interested, but because it was the best. And the only barometer of success I had was, is it the best?
And why? Why did you think that, something was instilled in you when you were younger? Why did you think that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I think in my home, it was a Protestant ethic. My dad was a preacher, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think there's this notion of excellence. You want to do the very best. And I think I didn't appreciate the difference between your best and the best. And I would say we should seek to do our best. But what is my best may not be your best.
Yeah.
And what's my best may not be the best, but it's the best for me. And so for me, I was operating probably more from the paradigm of what's the best rather than what's my best. I never thought about it until right now.
Well, that's good. Listen, I think that's what happens when you're younger, right? We're influenced by who's around us. And that's what makes, what you're doing at the D School, which we'll talk about, and what you do for, so many people, which is give them different ways to think, different ways to appreciate, right? Different ways to look at things,
Totally.
which is important. All right. So how long did you stay at this management consulting thing then that we know you hated?
Yeah. Well, so I did it for a summer.
Okay.
And then I accepted a full-time offer to return. So I knew I didn't like it. To say hate's a strong word. I mean,
I know
I would feel
I'm being John Schultz.
No, it's fine. No, and I probably said it too, but that's we can use it for the point of parody. I did it for a summer, and I knew I already disliked it enough, probably not to continue, and yet I accepted a full-time offer, despite the fact that I knew I didn't like it. Why? Because it's the best, right? You got to do the best.
Yep.
And then here's the irony. After 2 more years, there were some things I did enjoy about it. There were people that I really enjoyed. There were some projects I worked on that I enjoyed, but generally I didn't feel like I'm coming alive here. I felt like I'm doing a job. Right.
Right.
And at the end of those 2 years, what most people do is they go to business school. So I applied to business school, applied to the best school I could, which was Stanford, got in. And then they said, okay, if you want to, you can come back here afterwards and we'll pay for your business school. Now, knowing what I already knew, I said yes, which just adds to the intrigue of the John Schultz tension, yes. The line of tension you're building here.
I'm wondering, right? Right? Because here you are. All right. So you did that. Then what happened?
Well, the time in business school thankfully derailed my life. And the time specifically in the D school. So I had a mind that at some point I would transition from management consulting whenever I made enough money that I would then go into economic development. When I was in undergrad, I had spent a summer in Bolivia working in a incubator inside of a university. After undergrad, I spent the summer in Zambia working in an AIDS orphanage. And I felt like between my experiences in Zambia and Bolivia, I believed in the power of entrepreneurship and economic development to lift people out of poverty. And I thought at some point I want to do that. So whereas for most people in business school, the summer that they spend is a really important summer to facilitate a transition or an inflection point in their career.
Right.
For me, because I knew, quote unquote, I'm going back to consulting, I thought, well, this is kind of a gimme. I can do whatever I want this summer. I can be much more liberal in my pursuit. So I ended up at a startup in Delhi, India. And it fit some criteria I had in my mind. I hadn't spent time in Asia before. I wanted to do that. I hadn't been at a startup environment. I wanted to do that. And I went there, and it's actually there. And I'm, the typical business analyst. I'm running, pivot tables, doing spreadsheet analysis, things like that. But down the hall, there's these folks called designers who are working with foam core, who are spending the night in the slums, who are talking to our customer, who was typically a mother or father who lived off the electrical grid, who's burning kerosene in their home, which is terrible for indoor air quality and safety and things like that. And we're selling solar powered lighting systems to them. And these designers are going in and they're not just, designing new lights, they're finding new problems to solve. And I was fascinated by what these guys did. So I'm just poking my head in their design studio all the time. And after a while, they started saying things like, you're kind of d.school-y. And I would say, what's d.school-y? You're d.school-y. I thought that was an insult. And they said, no, it's cool. It's this place at Stanford. It's this new place. At the time, it's a couple years old. It's this new place at Stanford where folks like you, kind of MBAs who misfit, black sheep kind of people who don't fit in, which, as far as I'm concerned, I was the best. I did all the best things. I totally fit in, right?
Right.
But they had projected on me, you're clearly unhappy. You're clearly not doing what you should. You should go to the D school. So when I came back from Delhi, that second year of business school at Stanford, 2008, I immersed myself in design program courses as electives. And it was there when my, carefully laid, but perhaps unenjoyable path was totally derailed.
I love that. You had to go all the way to India to be enlightened, right?
That's just like Steve Jobs, right?
I think that's amazing. But what you had the courage to do that. I mean, not everybody would. So I think that's terrific. So what ingrained assumptions did you have about your life then at that moment that changed? What was the bust through? Because you could go look at that place down the hall and not actually do anything about it. So what happened from there?
I would say one of my mentors has a phrase that I really like: clarity emerges. And so it's not that I saw all the way down the path. It was that I was beckoned one more step.
Yep.
And so that my life has been this kind of series of almost beckoning. Hey, it's almost like someone's, hey, come over here.
Yep.
Try over here. And I just, for whatever reason, I've just been a little bit vulnerable to that weird whisper. Hey, come over here. And so it's not like, when I ultimately accepted what began as a 1-year appointment now, which is 13 years later, I haven't left, right? But when I accepted the 1-year appointment, it was a job that was less than 50% what I was going to make back at my consulting firm.
Yep.
So it's totally crazy. It's totally, it doesn't make any sense. And then when after that year, I was extended an opportunity to start running a major program, I was still going to be making half of what I would have made if I had gone back. And so there was never clarity. It was never like there was a big, one of the value propositions of the firm that I was at was economic value propositions was 10x in 10 years. In 10 years, you will be making 10 times as much money as you're making today, right? Pretty good value prop, right?
Yep.
There's no promise like that in academia, none whatsoever. It was, yeah, we don't really know if we're going to have budget. It's right in the middle of the housing crisis, right? We
Yep.
don't know if we can even pay you, right? And so, but my wife and I, we're actually people of faith. I don't subscribe to a faith system that guarantees, wealth. So I want to say that right off the bat. But
Yep.
Siri said, I don't know how to respond to that. That's funny. But I would say not believing, from a faith perspective, believing that we're going to get rich. My wife and I, when we were trying to make this decision, I remember distinctly, we would walk around our neighborhood and we'd pray together and we'd say, what we're seeking to know, what is God? We believe that God
Right.
has a will for our lives.
Yep.
What is your will?
Yep.
And so we would walk and we'd pray, and we're renting, this like overpriced little studio apartment in Palo Alto and trying to weigh the merits of, do I stay here where there's no money? Do I go back where there's lots, but it's miserable? Like, what do I do? And, we felt, again, not clarity, but a little bit of leading, a little bit of liberty, so to speak, to continue down this kind of unconventional path. And there were no outcomes guaranteed, but it's ended up being a delightful kind of discovery process along the way.
So is this an example? I heard you say this. The way you worked was more important than what you did. Is that an example of this? That,
yeah.
How did you learn the way you work was more important than what you did? Is that what this is for you or no?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's also, that's an allusion to the design process as well. Whereas what I do is about my title and my employer and that sort of thing. The way I'm working, I discovered at the D.school an approach to problem solving, which we've tried to somewhat memorialize in the book. It's a way of approaching problems, and the way you approach a problem is actually much more important than the problem you're working on, because the reality is there's no shortage of problems we're going to be facing. Right. And ultimately what I want to do is solve the problem of solving problems. And as long as solving problems is a problem, that's a problem.
And it's not going away. And that is
not going away.
But I think that's the fun of what all of our careers are made of. I mean,
totally.
When I get that call that I got to fix something to get something done or closed or move forward, when I'm done with that call, as much as it doesn't feel good all the time, I feel like, wow, one more way to get through something, one more way to learn how to do it. And I don't know, that's what makes me me.
Yeah, that's great. That's
so
great.
You're still there.
Adrenaline.
17, was it 17 years you're still there?
13 years.
13 years. Amazing. I guess you obviously love it because you're still there. What kept you there? Because, okay, it's one thing to say, I'm going to do this. It was your passion. I give you credit for going and doing that after, so long, just trying to, do what was best, but not maybe best for you. Yeah. What's kept you there?
Well, the opportunity to work with world-class students and organizations, it's really invigorating to get to contribute to the growth trajectory of it. I mean, you're seeing these students and you have the ability to really shape their trajectory. I mean, it's really remarkable. I would say, this is, I don't know when this podcast is going to be released, but I'm actually in the process of a transition right now. So you're saying you're still there. I'm still there, kind of, right? And by the time maybe people listen to this, I actually may not be. I'll continue to teach. Teaching is always going to be a part of my life. I mean, hopefully, I love it. But I would say I'm starting to experience some diminishing returns of, it's kind of becoming a little too easy to me. I want a new challenge. I don't feel the learning curve is as steep. And I'm not at a point, there may be a point in one's career, right, where that kind of plateauing of the learning curve is appropriate and fitting. I feel personally, I would like to be on a little bit steeper curve, which is a little scary and which is a little nerve-wracking, but it's also, I'm starting to feel that kind of whisper again, hey, come over here. And it's just as uncertain, by the way, as it was 13 years ago.
Good for you. And we'll talk about that. But I want to first start with this. I'm looking at Ideaflow. I love the logo. It's really cool.
Cool.
Like
thank you.
Right? Like waves
of
ideas. Very cool. Good graphics. What made you write this book? Obviously, you have 13 years of all this energy and amazing people you were with, right? Ideas flowing. This D.school sounds so cool. I guess it's like a collaboration, cross-departmental thing, right? Where you get everyone working to all these smart people.
The D.school's got, business school, law school, medical school, engineers, all coming together in this melting pot to solve wicked problems that don't fit in any one of those buckets, right? So that's the environment we're in. The reason we wrote the book, well, a couple of things. One, I would say there's this old cliche, write the book you want to read. And I felt there's no book that really encapsulated what we're teaching and what we're emphasizing in the world. There's a lot of books on innovation. And I would say innovation generally is this incredibly hyped phenomenon. You can't find an organization that says innovation is not important to us. Everybody's got it in their 7 strategic pillars, right? And yet for all the hype, it's totally undernourished and under-resourced as a capacity, as an ability. So that's kind of one thing that we saw is there's a huge delta between the level of hype and the level of rigor and practice in organizations. And then the other thing
innovation, right? Like, what is it, right? Like, what does it even mean, right? To innovate. I was actually in a meeting yesterday and we're sitting around the table and we're talking about innovation and they're like, well, how do you innovate? I'm like, well, make one little thing better at your job. One little thing that maybe no one would say or do or make happen. You go make happen. You don't have to be Einstein, right? So is that sort of the premise of what you're saying, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, the reality is there are problems everywhere, right? And when people think about innovation, they think of the iPod or they think of, Amazon or Airbnb, right? Which is great, which are innovations, but they're the product of a certain way of thinking that's as relevant to crafting an email or giving feedback or a sales pitch or delivering consequences at home. I just had a parenting situation where I brought innovation thinking to bear on, I have 4 daughters. How do we handle this disciplinary situation, right? The creativity is the art of solving problems. And sometimes the problem is what's our next big product we should launch or the next service that we should launch. But sometimes the problem is how do we improve the expense reimbursement process? And that's every bit as worthy of a candidate of innovative thinking. And there's a lot of mythology when it comes to creativity and innovation. You have people say there's creative organizations or creative industries, or there's the creative department, or there are creative people. And this whole kind of bifurcation of the world is nonsense. It's not helpful and it's not useful. And as long as people can opt out or self-unidentify, creativity is not for me, then what they're saying is, problem solving isn't for me. I don't need to solve problems in my life, to which I don't think anybody would agree. Everybody's got problems, but they don't realize that creativity is the art of solving problems. And when they do, all of a sudden, the number of tools that open up to them to make improvements or to solve problems, the tool set increases dramatically.
Well, because think about it, right? When you're grateful, you can't be unhappy. You just can't. If I sit here and just start riffing off, well, I'm grateful to be on this podcast with you. I'm grateful that I can go home and eat dinner tonight. So problems and creativity clash in my mind a little bit. Like for most people, when you're in fear, it's hard to be creative. How do you unlock that? Does Ideaflow teach us that? Or do you feel that's not a real thing? That's just my head.
No, it's a cool here's how I would resolve that seeming kind of paradox. Here's what we know about problems or solutions. The fitness of a solution, the single greatest variable that determines how good a solution is actually how many solutions you generate. So Dean Keith Simonton, he just won a Lifetime Achievement Award from Mensa, the organization that awards IQ points, studied breakthrough problem solving across domains. And what he found was a person's likelihood to solve a problem is the variable that was responsible for the most efficacy in solving problems was how many ideas they came up with, how many solutions they came up with.
So does that mean not being afraid to fail each time your idea goes out, or
like, well, right? even less than that,
it's like constantly trying and failing, or is that how you have to look at it, or no?
Not even failing, but just like, am I willing to say something that seems stupid, or am I willing to think something that seems stupid? You know, we have very, very narrow bands of tolerance. And what we know is ideas are naturally occurring phenomena. What does that mean? They're normally distributed. So if you go back to kind of college statistics class and you think of a bell curve, ideas fall on a bell curve. And so if you think about the quality on that bell curve, there's some on the right-hand side of the distribution that are really good. There's some on the left-hand side of the distribution that are really bad. And then there's a bunch in the middle that are kind of ordinary. Well, in order to get really good outcomes, high variability, the way to get to really good right-hand side is to allow yourself to go really bad left-hand side, because you can't create an asymmetric distribution. Nobody just thinks of good ideas. You have people who are narrow in their thinking and have a bunch of ordinary ideas, or you have people who are expansive in their thinking and have both more good ideas and more bad ideas. Quintessential example is Steve Jobs, right?
Okay.
When we think of Steve Jobs, we don't think, what an idiot. You might disagree with his management style or personality or whatever, right? But nobody disagrees. He's responsible for a great deal of innovation in the world today. Well, how did he do it? What Sir Johnny Ive said when he gave his memorial address at Steve Jobs' funeral was, Steve and I would sit down for lunch every day. And every day, Steve would say to me, "Hey, Johnny, you want to hear a dopey idea?" And Johnny said most of the time they were pretty dopey. In fact, sometimes they were truly terrible. But every once in a while, they take the air out of the room and leave us breathless in wonder. Right?
The point is,
right? Yep. It's about variability, right? Yep. You go, I only want iPod ideas. I go, well, where are your dopey ideas? And who's the person you're regularly sharing ideas that are dopey with? And that's what people don't get. That's what Steve Jobs got, is variation is critical. So going back to this idea of problem solving, you got a problem. Is there any instinct towards quantity? Almost always we're thinking, what is the answer? That's our default posture, right? And yet you and I aren't mathematicians, which is to say what? We're not addressing problems that have one right answer. In math, maybe, even though mathematicians say there's more than one right answer, right? But in math, you got a problem that's got the answer. In problems that we're facing in life, how do I deal with the fact that my kids broke a 115-year-old window in the house? Well, if my default mindset is what's the consequence? Right. Then I'm hemming and hawing in the kitchen with my wife. When I go, you know what we need? We need to come up with like 10 possible consequences, just to be expansive in our thinking. By the way, number 10 was the best one by far.
Right.
Okay? But the point is, I have this instinct to generate volume first. And the truth is, there's zero cost to generating a third and fourth and fifth and sixth idea. The only cost is it's a cognitive bias. It's called the Einstellung effect, the tendency to be fixated on a solution. But the reason for the Einstellung effect is because of what a guy named Ari Kruglowski identified as the longing for cognitive closure. It turns out things being unresolved is psychologically distressing to us. So the cost, when I said the cost of coming up with a third and fourth idea is low, it's true, economically, there's no cost to it. Where there is cost is psychologically, I've got to keep telling myself I haven't solved the problem yet, which is distressing because my longing is for the problem to be solved.
Well, but that's what I was saying, I guess, at the beginning of what we said. When you're in fear and, if this effect is real, you sort of can be deer in the headlights when it comes to solving solutions, right?
Totally.
Which is why it's more fun to, I always say, keep thinking a different way. Like everything you do, look at it in a different way every week.
That's
right?
what Einstein
Even
said.
things are going good because you're better off being creative when you're not in fear and complete uncertainty, right? Where you have the odds against you, than if you're constantly thinking of how to be better when you're actually doing well. Does that sort of make sense to you or no?
100%. Einstein said, someone asked him once, hey, how have you had so many breakthroughs when there's so many scientists with higher IQs than you have? And he said, I take longer on the problem. And they said, what do you mean? He said, I don't think of solutions until I've looked at a problem from 7, 8, or 9 different ways first.
Right.
And I think that's a part of what you're getting at. Look at it differently. And a lot of times we are fixated on this, even the notion, I mean, our whole conversation has been about problem solving. There's a whole kind of stream of thought. There's a chapter in the book on problem finding, problem framing, right? It's not just about solving a problem.
I like that. I like problem finding, not in a bad or negative way. I always want to make, my brain just keeps going, how can I make this more efficient? Mm-hmm. How can you change it a little bit to maybe make it better? If you get sort of, sitting in your old ways or in your ways, I think then the problems get bigger and the solutions, you're going to still need as many, but it feels worse, right? It sort of feels worse.
Yeah, that's right. No, one of the kind of key assignments at Stanford since the 1960s, you'll love this, and you already do it. It's called keep a bug list. So it's long before computer programming entered common parlance. It's not about errors in the lines of code. It's about a list of things that bug you, a list of things that bother you. If you keep a bug list, that's rich fodder for innovation, because people who are attuned to problems are people who are attuned to solutions.
Well, you may want to go create one of those bug fixes, right?
Yes,
I love that. I love it.
Exactly.
So is Ideaflow out in the marketplace or?
Yeah. It came out October 25th. And, I'm getting tons of notes from folks about applying the tools and implementing them in their lives and their organizations. And it's incredible to see how people are responding.
And how hard was it to write a book?
It is a labor of love. And I would say it's not hard in the sense that I believe in what I was doing. I believe in the topic and the tools. I've seen the impact, and it's fun actually to kind of synthesize in a different way, because it's this whole jambalaya in your mind, and there's a bunch of different ways of framing and describing things, and to be forced to kind of put it in an outline form. And it's a really useful exercise. I would say I'd write the book differently now. It'd be a different book now. And the way I talk about it and think about it is different than the way we presented it there. And I never appreciated the extent to which a book, you can think about it, it's like a picture. It's a point in time description of a person's thinking.
Yeah.
But even as I was reading the audiobook, for Audible, I'm like reading the audiobook going, oh, I wish we had put a different epigraph there. Or I wish we, because my mind isn't like this book is a reflection. It's a snapshot of my mind at a certain point of time, but I've continued to learn and grow and acquire information and acquire ways of describing things that when you talk to me and then you read the book, you go, oh, that's not exactly what he said. It's because we're two different people.
Yeah. I love how you did the Audible yourself, because I love when someone writes a book that it's the actual author.
Yeah.
Which is tremendous. So good for you. So you said at the beginning, I don't know if you want to say yet, but what's this new thing you're embarking on now?
Well, there's a couple of things that are really interesting. One of the things I've been working on is a software tool to actually support people to diverge. So the instinct to generate options is underdeveloped. And so I want to help people develop that. But what I found is if you just say, come up with 10, they go, well, how? But if I say, well, how would Steve Jobs do it? They go, oh, well, he'd do this. How would Oprah do it? Well, she'd do this. Well, how would, Nike do it? Well, they do this. Do you realize you just came up with 4 ideas? They go, oh, well, so I've been building kind of a chat bot of sorts to basically facilitate helping people generate more. It's something that you can teach yourself to do. But I find, the other day, again, with this disciplinary thing with my family, I actually opened up the chat bot and I used it to help me just get outside of my head. Because the truth is,
tools are great. I mean, mentors, tools, learning about yourself. I think that's the fun of that. That's like the fun of life, right?
Right. But then imagine, by the way, you're an enterprise and 1,000 of your employees are using this tool. Imagine the kind of data you get.
Like unbelievable data, right?
I know what problems people are facing. I know solutions.
Talking to it, or is it typing in, or?
Yeah, it's typing right now. Yeah, but you can imagine talking or things like that. But then the data in terms of the problems people are trying to solve, who is streaking? Like, do I want to know if I'm the CEO of, Schultz Enterprises that John has done an idea quota the last 10 days? Yeah, I want to bring him into a brainstorm, right? He's been training. Who do I want to run the next leg of the relay? The guy who's been exercising, right?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is I've been working on a radical, novel new venture fund, actually. One of the things I've done in my capacity as the director of executive education is I advise CEOs of companies on growth and innovation strategy. And one of the things I've identified, along with a couple of really sharp partners, is this realization that enterprises often developed solutions to problems they experience, but that they can't sell in the market. Because they're, so canonical example is restaurant company develops a simple software to help their servers deal with dividing up tips at the end of the night. Well, that's a great solution they've created for themselves, and it works for their 300 restaurants and their 30,000 employees. Well, who else needs that is every other restaurant. But the market, what the market says is you can't sell an enterprise software. You're a restaurant. Your job is to come up with a holiday cocktail. And if the restaurant tries to, sell the product, they get punished, actually. And this is a common theme we're finding. Enterprises are solving novel problems for themselves that they can't commercialize. And so our venture fund creates a mechanism to enable enterprises to commercialialize the solutions they've created, but can't monetize themselves.
There's got to be so many of those sitting around in so many different companies. I mean, if you look at Amazon, they did it, but commercialized it, right?
Totally. Very few CEOs have the mandate of Jeff Bezos, which is,
right.
Whatever not whatever you want, but you can enter lots of spaces that seem unrelated and we'll see how it goes, right? They have to be way more kind of focused. You can't do that. I heard a manufacturing executive say the other day, they built a very interesting piece of a tool that does diagnostics on an assembly line. And he said they actually tried to sell it to another manufacturing company. And the market said, you can't sell you're not an engineering company, you're a manufacturing company. And so they shelved it. And now it's just sitting on the shelf and it does the job for them.
No, it's brilliant. There's hundreds and probably thousands of those things sitting all over the place. It's your goal will be, how do you access it and find it and get people to actually think about it in a different way, right? Use the Ideaflow concepts to actually say, all right, so if we can't solve for us, let's offshoot it. But that's going to be a fun journey for you. That sounds exciting.
It's radically different, and yet it is a very natural evolution. It's been born out of relationships that I've had and observations I've made. And it's really fun to actually kind of get on the field, so to speak. As a teacher, you're almost more like a coach, but then raising a fund, it's like, oh, I got to suit up and I got to start.
Well, you had that whisper. You're getting another whisper. There you are. Exactly. Which I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
And this was great. So we can buy your book everywhere, right? Amazon.
Yeah. It's everywhere you buy fine literature, you can buy it. And if they want to check out, we've got a free bonus chapter on the website. Ideaflow.design is a website. If you go there, there's a bonus chapter called How to Think Like Bezos and Jobs.
Oh, good.
And it's about kind of mental tricks and habits of those two breakthrough thinkers. We observed 7 things that we felt they're learnable, repeatable ways of thinking that anyone can incorporate into their life.
I love that. So I'm excited for you. It was so good doing this. I appreciate you coming on to the podcast. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
This was fun, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Have a good one, John.